for that Brian Carter. Can you hear me, Brian?
And Veronica, can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, we can hear you. So we're live now. Thank you to all the STEM ecosystems and participants who have joined us today. My name is Veronica Gonzalez, and I am a member of the TIES Technical Assistance Team and a supporter, really the manager of the practice groups, which is what has initiated today's presentation. I am going to cover one really quick logistical thing and then hand it over to Brian Carter of the Overdeck Family Foundation, who so graciously introduced us to the presenters today to do the introductions. So as part of today's webinar, everybody will be muted during the session. We will have both of our presenters go through their slides and present the information, and then we'll allow for about 15 or 20 minutes or so of questions at the end of the webinar. You can feel free to add your questions in the question box as we move along throughout the presentation. Just know that we won't get to them until the very end. As well as, we'll try to use the raise hand function where we can unmute you at the end where you can verbally ask your question. Without further ado, I will go ahead and hand over to Brian Carter of the Overdeck Family Foundation to go ahead and start us off with introductions. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks so much, Veronica. So first, I want to thank Veronica and TIES for organizing this webinar, and for everyone who's participating for showing, your interest in what we think is a really important topic. So the Overdeck Family Foundation, our mission is helping students achieve their full academic potential. And we know that in order to do that, students need to be challenged and stimulated, particularly in STEM. So we were excited by the work that organizations like Education First and Achieve were doing to ensure that, particularly in science and in STEM, kids have these opportunities. So just for a background point of view, Education First is a national mission-driven strategy, policy, and grant-making effectiveness organization with unique and deep experience in P12, P20 education. We first were made aware of Education First when we used them to facilitate a convening that we had on family math, and they did an outstanding job, and that made me aware of some of the other work that they were doing kind of in the ESSA space. They put out a great report on looking at Title II provisions within ESSA, and that led us to the conversations around STEM and ESSA. And then obviously Achieve, created in 1996 by a bipartisan group of governors and business leaders. Achieve is a nonprofit education organization that spent 2 decades leading the efforts to help states make college and career readiness a priority for all students. So we were excited to work with Education First to get out making the most of ESSA, opportunities to advance STEM education. And as we were about to release, we saw that Achieve also was doing their own analysis of state plans and put out leveraging ESSA to promote science and STEM education in states. So with that, I don't want to take up too much time because I think this is a rich discussion that we want to get into. So I'm going to introduce Anand Vaishnav, who's the principal over at Education First, that him and his colleague Jacob Waters has done great work on analyzing the state reports. And then I'll also introduce Jenny Taylor, who's Senior Associate for the Policy and Practice team at Achieve, and Vanessa Walbrink, who's a Program Associate for the Science team at Achieve. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Anand to bring us up to speed on the Ed First work.
Great, thanks, Brian, and good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, depending on your time zone. As Veronica mentioned, this is a little bit of a twofer, so we'll have our report as well as Achieve's report on science and ESSA. I'll go through my slides and then turn it over to them. And just one note, I believe you all received the copies of the report in advance. So the slides that I'm sharing are the report. So I'll be going through it and you will have time to go through it on your own at your leisure. So I think we will just go ahead and get started. So Brian mentioned a little bit about Ed First. We created this resource on behalf of the Overdeck Family Foundation, and really the question was, what are states proposing on STEM and ESSA? And how can advocates, funders, and state and district policymakers push those ideas further? That was kind of the question we were seeking to answer in this report. So, you know, if you are at the state level, if you're on the line and you work in a state agency, you might use this report to get some inspiration for your STEM proposals in ESSA. If you're at the district level, you might use this to keep an eye on STEM efforts in ESSA that will be presented to you, such as 21st Century Community Learning Center opportunities. And if you're an advocate, which I think most of the folks on the line are, we want to arm you with information about STEM and ESSA and comparisons to help you drive your advocacy and your information campaigns in the states that you're working in. So I'm going to go through the slides relatively quickly. There's a lot of content here, and so I won't be reading every single word, but again, you do have the report. And please feel free at the end to highlight any questions that you might have. So just a little bit of background. I think most of the folks on the line will agree with this, that high quality STEM education is vital, not just for our economy, but also for students' well-rounded education. And the problem is that inequitable access to STEM jeopardizes both of those things, with students of color and in high poverty schools not having the same kinds of access and employment opportunities in STEM as others. So in comes ESSA, and because of its relatively more autonomy than its predecessor, No Child Left Behind, states have much more leeway to expand STEM. And so how do they do that? Well, it's mainly in the three funding categories, and it's in Title I for accountability and school improvement, Title II for teacher training and support, and Title IV, student supports and the 21st Century Community Learning Center applications. There's also Title III for English language learners, and Achieve is going to go deep a little bit more in that in a few minutes. These three sort of funding areas are where we saw the most STEM activities. Now, it's impossible to talk about those areas without talking about funding and acknowledging that the administration's budget, at least as we know so far, puts a lot of funding for ESSA at risk, and particularly funding for STEM. So two of the places that house many of the STEM opportunities will be zeroed out. Now, the conventional wisdom is that the administration's budget proposal is not going to pass exactly like this. But that remains to be seen. There's there's a lot going on in Washington these days, so we'll see how this shakes up. We just don't know quite yet. But you know, many advocates are working very hard on this issue, and I'm sure some of the folks on the line are as well. So what we did is we reviewed 25 plans. 17 of them were officially submitted by states, and 8 of them were draft plans that have not been officially submitted and that are subject to change. And then we also interviewed some STEM experts at the front end and the back end of our research to help us think of recommendations for states stemming from the major themes that we saw. This was our review timeline. We read plans that had been submitted April and May, and all the way through mid-June to include some of the states that had some updates to their submitted plans. Important to remember that none of these plans have been officially approved by the U.S. Department of Education. So that's just one big caveat, is that things can and probably will change. But these are the states that we read. And you can see it's a pretty good mix. You know, there's a pretty good mix of geography and size and diversity. And the states that are in green, whose draft plans we reviewed, how we picked them was in our interviews with STEM experts. We asked, what are the states that probably have the most to say about STEM? And that's where we went. So what do we find? It's good stuff here. There were basically 4 high-impact policies that many states proposed. And I think that's what was fascinating to us, is that we went into this thinking that we would sort of do a catalog of interesting and innovative STEM initiatives that states were proposing. And in many cases, we did find those. But I think we were struck by the commonality of some of the state's applications. There were 4 policies that they all sort of coalesced, not all, that many of them coalesced around. And those are the ones that we studied in depth in our report. One big caveat is that ESSA plans don't include all of a state's STEM initiatives. Many states have STEM strategic plans or STEM councils or have STEM elements in their state education agency strategic plans. ESSA is a small slice of what a state does, so just want to put it out there that it's not, what we found is not an exhaustive list of everything a state is doing in STEM. So we'll take the first one, and Achieve is going to talk much more about this in much depth because there is a lot of nuance to this. What we looked at was, are states including or strongly considering including performance on their state science test in their accountability system? And so the way our findings kind of are displayed here, as you can see on the left, there's the map that shows the states that are or are not doing the indicator that we're looking at. On the right, we thought, well, if you do have this in your accountability system, if you do have state science results in that, how did you include it, and how can a state promote student success with it? So, for example, using science and accountability system puts a focus on it, obviously, and that tends to drive the amount of time that schools and districts spend on science. Similarly, accountability system data, when it's disaggregated, allows you to look at results and prompt states and advocates to dig deeper. How are schools resourced to support science? Is that equitable across a district or even across schools? So all of our findings are sort of displayed this way with the map on the left, and then some things for states and advocates to think about on the right-hand side. And then in the subsequent slides, for each of sort of the promising practices, we took each one of them and looked for evidence of where it's worked in the past. So, for example, the issue on instructional time, off to the left there is good research that shows that states that include science and accountability system ratings spend much more time on science in the classroom. And so for each of these findings, we tried to pull out external reports that of this report to dig deeper into. The next thing we looked at was inclusion of career and technical education indicators in accountability systems. And so 17 states had that. The question is, what can you do with the data? How do you use it? And so that led to, of course, those bullets there on the right. So, the important thing I think for this indicator is one of the things that we found is making sure that are the demands of the home state's industry represented in the state's career and technical education opportunities? Breaking down the accountability system data by industry or certainly by student population can tell you that. So for CTE, that's an example of one of the things that we wanted to highlight. Another promising practice that we would urge states to do, and this largely comes from Advanced CTE's research, is to think of multiple measures of career readiness. So in this accountability indicator, states included in their systems anything from course taking to course performance to certificate attainment, and that's good. Multiple measures to measure career readiness when it comes to CTE indicators are important. And the Advanced CTE report that we cite there has a couple of other examples. So I'm going to go through the second CTE slide. That one had the most recommendations. Third, we looked at how many states were considering or strongly considering including advanced placement or international baccalaureate indicators in this accountability system. The reason being that access and opportunities for advanced coursework is something that they're encouraging schools to do. Here we found that 19 states are doing that. And again, when you think about what this means is, this indicator is often used at the high school level, has to be used at the high school level. But in many cases, it's just too late. You wait for an 11th grader to enter an AP class and potentially take an exam. That's probably too late to have a real shot at success. So one of the promising practices that we thought about was really thinking of AP and IB pipelines for both teachers and students. So before they even get into high school, is the pump being primed, so to speak, for teachers to get ready to teach at this level, as well as for students to be able to sit in a class and succeed in the advanced coursework that's in front of them. And so finally, we looked at which states are requiring or encouraging STEM activities in their 21st Century Community Learning Center grants. And here we thought this is one of the biggest areas of advocates to influence. And so in addition to advocating simply for STEM to be given priority points in these 21st century applications, or to be considered as kind of a main area of focus, what we learned from experts here was that it's the engagement of partners in creating hands-on programming that really makes 21st Century Community Learning Center programming come alive for students. And you can see that a lot of these recommendations have to do with the use of external partners. It's the hands-on programming largely provided by external partners that schools often can't do that makes these programs successful. And in fact, as some of the data show here, make them popular with parents. One thing to keep in mind about 21st Century Community Learning Center plans is that this is a real spectrum. So on one side of the spectrum, for example, you have New Mexico that said, you know, this focus will be a part of every 21st Century grantee. So no 21st Century Community Learning Center grantee is in New Mexico is going to be funded without a focus in STEM. That's on one side. And then you have others, such as Oregon, that says, you know, STEM is going to be one of 5 things that we're looking for. And so they're not, you know, going to say it's going to be given priority points or encouraged. It's just, you know, we want to see that. So on the previous slide, you know, it's portrayed as kind of black and white, like you're either including it or not including it. This one in particular, the reality is a little bit more nuanced. And so we created this slide. I think it was pretty helpful for advocates to see kind of which states are doing what and how deep they're actually prioritizing STEM. Now, one interesting thing I'll say about Title II and Title IV is that the findings were a little different. And it's not to say that they're random. It's, you know, what states want to spend the money on. It's just that they didn't have the same kind of clear trends that we saw in other areas. So Title II, of course, is for educators' support and development, and a bunch of other things, the class size reduction and literacy and civics education. And so we pulled out a couple of states that had kind of concrete STEM proposals in their Title II narratives. And so that largely does have to do with improving the skills of educators to teach STEM courses, or using Title II dollars to recruit teachers to hard to staff subjects. And presumably, you know, they don't spell this out, but STEM subjects are classified as hard to staff, at least in some grades and subjects. Same thing for Title IV, not a lot of commonality in terms of what states were sort of focusing on. There are, I think, something like 13 things that you can spend Title IV money on. And so many states just said, yeah, well, we're going to do all 13. And other states said, well, you know, in addition to those, we're going to do all these other things in STEM. And so one challenge here is trying to divine from these applications, well, how serious is the commitment to STEM? If it's one of 3 dozen things you're going to be funding with Title IV, probably not. If it's one of a few, then probably. So we tried to pick a couple of states to illustrate how the diversity of what states were proposing in terms of Title IV. We did find a couple of states that were doing some interesting things above and beyond. And so New Mexico, I think, is probably rose to the top of this in terms of it's going to be creating a new STEM readiness indicator and accountability. And it's not just performance on science assessment, but on student engagement in STEM. And so that's something I think we'll want to keep an eye on. So I'll wrap up here by just showing to you once again, sort of recapping the 4 most common proposals in STEM or in ESSA when it comes to STEM. It's state science assessment and accountability systems, CT indicators and accountability, inclusion of AP and IB indicators, and then STEM mentions in 21st Century Community Learning Center grants. And so then we literally kind of and figuratively took a step back and said, okay, well, if you're looking at this, what do you do with this information? And so we came up with kind of 4 ideas. One is that, it's not just what happens inside the 4 walls of the classroom or the traditional school day. There's incredible opportunities outside of the school day for STEM education to really come alive. And so and ESSA actually allows this. Dollars can be spent for professional development of partners or out of school time. And so it's something that we think states should take advantage of. Another is really using equity data in state accountability systems to drive resources, to drive change. And that just means, looking at the breakdown of, for example, who's taking advanced placement courses, where are the results better than others, to the extent that a state is reporting that. A third one is just, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit when it comes to ESSA, and for a clear example of that is linking to STEM in 21st Century Community Learning Center applications. And so we would encourage advocates to sort of think about what are some quick wins that they potentially could have with STEM in ESSA. And then finally, the ability for partnering with outside organizations to be included in ESSA dollars and bring in more STEM resources is very clear. Title IV, Title II, they all allow that. And, I think the folks on this line certainly know better than I do that external organizations are really critical to helping schools with STEM. And so we just wanted to call that out it doesn't have to be just a science teacher, fighting the good fight in a school. There are partners that can be brought to bear to help. That concludes all of our major findings. I'll just point out one kind of fun slide, which I think it took a lot of fact checking, but if in the appendix of the report is every state that we read and where they fell in the findings that we looked at, with an additional nuance for 21st century community learning centers, as I mentioned. And then we have links to all the plans as we have them. So that's my report, and just want to say thanks for listening, and I'm eager to take your questions and comments at the end. Veronica, I'll turn it back over to you so you can give the controls to Achieve for the slide sharing.
Great, thank you so much. Vanessa, I went ahead and you should be able to show your screen now. Great, we can see it.
Okay, yes, and I have unmuted myself.
Great, thank you.
So let me just, there we go. Okay, hello, my name is Vanessa Walbrink, and I'm going to be joined by Jenny Taylor as well, and we're going to talk about Achieve's report, leveraging ESSA to promote science and STEM education in states. The new federal education law gives states the opportunity to re-examine their strategies to create a better science education. ESSA allows states to set ambitious academic goals, develop an accountability plan, and use federal funding for certain programs and initiatives. But states can also leverage existing policies outside of ESSA around assessments and graduation requirements to move science education in the right direction. So to be able to best advocate for policies that lead to a better science education, it's important to know the current policy landscape and what the baseline is for existing state policies around science. So with that in mind, Achieve's brief looks into what ways states can include science and STEM in their ESSA plans, as well as some examples of what states are proposing in submitted plans. And it includes a landscape analysis of all states' current assessment requirements and graduation requirements to help set the national policy context for science. So just a couple notes, we only looked at ESSA plans from the 16 states plus DC who submitted plans to the department already. We did not include drafts in this analysis, but once the remainder of plans have been submitted this September, we do plan to update the report to include the remaining states. Secondly, this brief focuses specifically on science, so it's a little different from the EdFirst report in that way. But in the way that states develop their ESSA strategies sometimes doesn't allow us to separate science from STEM. So therefore, when we discuss those ESSA-funded opportunities, our scope does widen to all of STEM rather than just science. So if you hear me switching back and forth between science and STEM, that's why. So before I get into it, I just want to mention a few big ideas. Again, this is an opportunity for states to signal the value of science to districts, schools, and their communities through science programs and policies. But we want to acknowledge that ESSA plans are just one lens through which we can evaluate how states are prioritizing STEM. We know that there are other programs out there like Governor STEM initiatives, for example, that are moving states forward in this area. And to note some high-level trends right off the bat, we saw that more than half of states included science assessment in their accountability plans, which is significant. And through the ESSA-funded programs, we noticed many states are focusing on increasing student interest and engagement in STEM, equity, and helping teachers be better equipped to integrate innovative STEM strategies into their instruction. So as I mentioned, one opportunity ESSA provides is to craft new goals and accountability plans. While many states have proposed incorporating science assessment results as a performance indicator in their accountability plans, only 2 states so far have set goals for science achievement, Michigan and Tennessee. Part of this is because ESSA requires states to set long-term goals in math and ELA, but not in science. But we know that setting goals in science can be an important indicator of a state's commitment to improving science education and give them a chance to push for better policies around science to meet those goals in general. So we just wanted to point out these 2 states. Of the 17 ESSA plans that have been submitted to date, 10 states are including science in their accountability system. This is with science assessments, not including things like AP or IB tests or CTE that might be part of a larger CCR indicator. This is just straight science. And again, adding science to accountability systems can be a meaningful way to show the value of science, but where it's included in the accountability system has become a topic of discussion as US Ed has been giving states feedback. So I'll just give a quick overview of the indicators. ESSA requires states to include these 5 indicators in their ESSA plans. But the department has indicated in their feedback to Delaware and Nevada that states cannot include science in the academic achievement indicator, the first one there, which should only include proficiency on math and ELA assessments. So the department specified that states who do want to include science can do so in the second academic indicator listed here. Most call it academic progress indicator because it allows states to use a student growth measure, and that's how most states are proposing to use it right now. But it's also sometimes called the other academic indicator because it also allows another valid and reliable academic indicator as a measure. And so that's where science could fit in if states choose to do that. And secondly, science can fit into the school quality or student success indicator, which has a lot more flexibility, sometimes called the 5th indicator. And this has implications for how much weight or value is given to science in the overall accountability plan, because ESSA indicates that indicators, the first 4 listed here, must be given much greater weight than the school quality or student success indicator. So if states choose to put science in that last indicator, it wouldn't necessarily send as strong a signal about the value of science as if it were in an academic indicator. And now I'll pass it over to Jenny.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. So as we were looking at ESSA plans and saw that states were beginning to incorporate science assessment results into their accountability systems or proposing to do so, we wanted to broaden our scope to think about what the larger landscape looks like for assessments in science in the K-12 space. And then we did a similar look for graduation requirements. And as Vanessa mentioned at the outset, we really focused on science. So as we talk about assessment, today it'll be in the lens of, through the lens of just science, as well as graduation requirements. So on our website, you can find assessment information for math assessments and ELA assessments, as well as graduation requirements. So just wanted to provide that additional context. So when you think about science assessment in states, it's important to remember that science assessment actually is different. So unlike English language arts and mathematics, the science assessments do not have to be administered annually in grades 3 through 8. Instead, states must test once per grade band in science, and the grade bands are 3 through 5 and 6 through 9, then 10 through 12 for high school. So consequently, states have more leeway when they assess in science, especially in the early grades, when you think about science assessment in comparison to English language arts and mathematics. And as we think about science assessment, we also think about the quality of the assessment and their alignment to standards, especially as we know that many states have adopted new science standards in recent years, that states are in a bit of a transition as they work to align assessments to their assessments to their new standards. So Achieve continues to monitor assessment developments and report by state who's administering what assessments and in what grades. So this next slide, you'll see we've broken down by grade band which states test in which grades. So as you can see, in grades 3 through 8, 6 states test students more than once per grade band: in Arkansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Nebraska, South Carolina, and Utah. The most commonly tested grade is the top of the grade band in grade 5, which is a common theme throughout the grade band testing, is to test at the upper end of the grade band. You'll also note that the totals exceed 50 because there are states that are testing in multiple grade bands. Then looking at the middle school science assessment grade band, we see again that the majority of testing is happening in grade 8, with 44 states in DC testing at that grade level. Arkansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, and Nebraska test each year in grades 3 through 8, and South Carolina and Utah are testing 4 through 8. Arkansas actually has an assessment in grade 9 as well. And then finally moving to high school, and it's worth noting this data is for the 2016-17 school year. It's the year for which we have the most recent data, but we update our assessment data annually, so what states are administering which assessments for 2017-18 will be available in the coming year. So looking at the high school grade band testing, you see that the landscape gets a little bit more complicated in that some states, half of them, are administering end of course assessments. So for end of course assessments, students are taking a test at the end of the course or of receiving the content. So that is the method used by half of states, and the other half are administering comprehensive assessments that are administered in either grade 10 or 11, or sometimes in both grades. And diving a little bit deeper into the end of course assessment landscape, it's worth noting that of the states that administer an end of course exam, 16 states in DC are offering only one assessment, and in biology, the most frequently used end of course assessment in science is biology. There are 8 states that offer multiple end of course exams, and the second most common end of course exam is in chemistry. So the table that you see on this slide lays out which states are offer which end of course assessments. Again, students only have to be tested once, so if a state has multiple end of course assessments, it doesn't mean that the student will complete multiple necessarily. Then moving to graduation requirements. So in thinking about access to rigorous STEM coursework opportunities in ESSA, we wanted to again broaden our thinking to what are the current graduation requirements in place in states, to understand what courses are currently available and where there are opportunities for states and advocates to leverage to advocate for more rigorous course availability, or to better understand the landscape of what is currently required and expected of students prior to graduation. So again, these are the requirements for the class of 2017, the most recent graduating cohort. So in doing a landscape analysis of all 50 states and their regular diplomas, so this does not take into account honors diplomas, this is just to earn a state's regular diploma, we see nearly 2/3 of states are requiring students to complete at least 3 units of science prior to graduation. 4 states in DC expect students to complete 4 units of science prior to graduation, and there are 9 states that only require 2 units of science prior to graduation. And if you see on the chart, there are 3 states that have 0 units required. It is worth noting that those 3 states are all local control states, so the state is not setting graduation requirements in any subject area. Those decisions are being left to the district to determine. So it's not that they're not requiring science of students in the state, it's just that expectation is not being set at the state level. So these states also have assessment components in place as a way to check on coursework. So students are still going to have to be assessed in science, so there will be course content. There will clearly be content. So our next cut at this data was to look beyond just unit requirements and look at course specificity. And by this, we mean how specific is the state and their graduation requirements about what courses or content students must complete prior to graduation? Requiring units is one way to make sure that there's exposure to science content, but there are a lot of potential courses that students can take, so adding course specificity and content requirements also helps ensure that students have access to rigorous courses and content. So in terms of course specificity, states range from providing no guidance to specifying some topics or concepts to be covered to specifying courses. In our analysis of states and their regular diplomas, over half of states specify that students complete biology prior to graduation. The next most common set of graduation requirements to see is for students to complete, in addition to biology, either chemistry, physics, or physical science. You'll see we've provided two examples of, in Texas and Maryland, of what their graduation requirements are. So in Texas, you see that there's the biology, chemistry, and physics requirement with flexibility in a fourth science course. And then in Maryland, it's 3 credits with 1 in biology and 2 that include a laboratory experience from those different categories. So different states take different approaches to how they specify which courses or content or concepts should be covered prior to graduation. And as I mentioned at when I started talking about graduation requirements, we were looking at regular diplomas, but we also did do an analysis of state STEM diploma or endorsement options. This is a change in graduation requirements that we've seen in recent years. The states are starting to trend towards offering endorsements or additional diploma options in addition, on top of completing the requirements for the regular diploma. So Hawaii, New York, and Texas all have STEM diploma or endorsement options that students can opt to complete. Hawaii and Texas are requiring students to complete 4 units of science rather than 3 to earn the STEM option. Ohio recently approved an honor STEM diploma that requires 5 units of science. And we know that there are other states that, these are illustrative, there are other states that are in the process of developing or have recently developed STEM endorsements, including Colorado and Nevada. And with that, I will turn it back over to Vanessa to get us back into a more ESSA-specific conversation.
Oh, great. Thank you, Jenny. So now we'll talk a little bit about the opportunities for ESSA-funded strategies and programs in STEM. And our report does offer a few examples of what states are proposing in their plans, but I won't go over them here because it'd be too redundant, but look for that in our report. But here we will go over how we present the opportunities for STEM programs in our report. So the statutory language itself calls out opportunities to support STEM education. But we also wanted to present information from the non-regulatory guidance released by the department in April 2017 called Resources for STEM Education, which was intended to help states, districts, and their partners better understand how to use federal funds to support innovative, equity-focused STEM education strategies. So this guidance points to provisions in ESSA that could be used to support STEM education even when they don't explicitly call out STEM. And as Anand mentioned, it warrants mentioning again that the funding for fiscal year 18 is still very unclear and the outcome may affect many of these proposed programs. So here's how we present the information in our report. We list the ESSA provision, its purpose, and then what the statute itself says and what the department guidance says. So you can see with Part A and B here in Title I, for Part A, there's no explicit reference to STEM in the actual law, but then the guidance provides extra language and clarification. And then in Part B, it's the other way around. And Part B, I'll also note, Jenny mentioned that states are switching over to new science standards, and that provision is a clear nod to states who are switching over to new science standards based on the National Research Council's framework for K-12 science education. which has a focus on engineering design and practices. So I won't go over all of these, but I'll just kind of show them briefly, and they're all included in our report, so you can look at them more closely here. We've got Title II, Title III, and Title IV programs. And so I will end by mentioning a few high-level recommendations. As I mentioned, our brief has more of a focus on the policy landscape around science education and how ESSA can be used to advance it. So our recommendations are more high-level state policy ideas. And the real bottom line you should walk away with is that states should use all levers they have to signal the value of science education and to advance science education. So that can include things like adding science to accountability systems in a meaningful way, including setting ambitious goals in science, and finding multiple ways to do that, especially when states are transitioning to those new standards and don't have aligned assessments yet. They shouldn't put all of their eggs in the assessment basket. Secondly, making sure that assessments we're using to monitor student learning are high quality and aligned to the standards, so that they can actually provide valuable information to improve instruction. Also, graduation requirements should include science and ensure that students have access to science courses and graduate college and career ready. And then being smart and making evidence-based decisions to craft strategies and programs to improve science education, like STEM teacher recruitment and retention, if that's a big problem in your state, or STEM after school programs. That's it. So thank you for your interest in our report and improving science education, and find our report on our website listed there. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. And as you both were presenting, both parties were presenting, I should say, we had a few questions come in. And so feel free, if you're logged into the webinar and you have questions, to ask those either in the question box or you can raise your hand. But I'm going to go ahead and unmute Ron Ottinger, who had our first question. Ron, can you? Let's see if it'll actually unmute him. Ron? Okay. It looks like he's trying to chat, but I'm not sure we can hear him. So perhaps I'll just read the question. The question is, are the plans flexible enough that priorities can change and resources can be shifted around as plans solidify? What is happening with the other 25 states, and which states have the strongest plans from a cross-sector standpoint? And on that question might have been when you were speaking.
Okay, Veronica, I can take a stab at that. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so flexibility on plans. They're pretty flexible. So one interesting thing is, these plans did not require, along with their narrative, a budget. So, that'll come later in the form of a consolidated application. But there's a lot of flexibility in how states can spend sort of blend funding streams. Let me take that back. Maybe I shouldn't be so straightforward. Maybe the correct term is not a lot of flexibility, but there is flexibility. So, for example, there are some states, and I think Michigan is one, that said, look, we're going to be spending Title I money on school improvement, which is where they should be, but we're also going to bring in some money from Title IV to pay for that. And so that indicates that, they'll be able to use some Title IV money, which is for like student support, STEM, and a bunch of other things, as part of their school improvement plan. So there's some decent flexibility that they can use. And the money side is not set in stone yet. What happens with the other 25 or so plans you mentioned? So In April and May, there are two deadlines that states could submit their plans. It was April 3rd and then September 18th. And so the first round of states submitted in April. There's an additional 30 days for some states that hadn't gone through their gubernatorial review. But so 17 states submitted in the April-May timeframe, which leaves another 33 or 34 for County District of Columbia submitted in the first round. Those are going to be due September 18th. So we're going to have another batch of plans land in mid-September. And so lots of folks. Achieve is one, We're another. I think we'll all be sort of rereading the plans once the first 17 have been approved to see if anything changed, and then the new batch that comes out. And then I think Ron's other question about which states have the strongest plans from a cross-sector standpoint. It depends on what you're looking at. So there are a couple of groups that have done some reviews just for overall quality. So Bellwether and the Collaborative for Student Success created this. They read all the plans, and one of our staff members was involved in that. I think the website is called checkyourstate.org, I think. And so they rated all the plans and found, that some did better than the others. The Fordham Institute just came out with a report today that looked at states, the strength of their accountability system. So they only looked at accountability. They didn't look at the overall plan, but the accountability and school improvement parts are sort of the heart of the plan. And so they've, kind of assigned ratings to those states. In general, folks are pointing to states like New Mexico and Tennessee and Colorado for having relatively strong and well-written plans across the board. And there are a bunch of groups that are sort of reading these plans and issuing their own kind of ratings or reviews. I think the National Council on Teacher Quality did one just looking at Title II. So there aren't that many that are doing it from a sort of an overall, like all 5 or 6 sections of the plan. Instead, they're looking at specific grant areas like Title II or accountability. But reviews are out there, and it's hard to say. There are some sections of the plans that are stronger than others. But in general, a lot of reviews are sort of looking at like Tennessee, Colorado, New Mexico to be relatively strong in a variety of different places.
Great, thank you. So we have 2 questions from Gerald Solomon. I just unmuted you. Gerald, can you hear us?
Sure, you can hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely terrific presentation, getting into really the details of things. So I have 2 questions, somewhat unrelated, but I'll give them both to you. The first is the assessment component approach can be viewed by others as being either lax or flexible, depending upon viewpoint. What do you see as the best or better of the approaches that are being taken? And if you were to counsel STEM ecosystems on which to take as far as advocacy within their own communities, what would you suggest? And then the other question, again, a bit unrelated, is as you talked about the concepts of some design thinking and engineering design work, and there's some overlap obviously with NGSS. What are you learning about what the ESSA plans are doing, and which ones do you suggest we look at that have embedded some good quality engineering design curriculum?
Veronica, maybe the Achieve folks might be best to start with that.
Yeah. In terms of assessment approach, oh yeah, Jenny, I don't know if you want to take anything about assessment.
Yeah, I
know that in terms of.
I'm happy to take on the assessment question. I just have a clarifying question. Do you mean it? Did you mean in terms of where states are putting science assessment in their accountability systems, or did you mean science assessment choices from a different perspective? I just want to make sure that I'm answering the right question.
Accountability system. Yeah.
Okay. So I think, yeah. Okay. Perfect. I just wanted to make sure it was going to hopefully be the answer to the question you were asking. So I think that it's there's been some pretty clear guidance from USED and from the Hill that the intention of the legislation was that the academic indicator is only for ELA and math assessments, and that if you want to use additional assessments in your accountability system, then they need to be factored in elsewhere. So I don't think we've seen much movement yet from the department moving away from that, and it seems like states are therefore moving their science assessments elsewhere in their accountability system. So I think that from the perspective of trying to ensure that science is included, it becomes a question of how much can a state weight the science assessment in their accountability system so that it's still meaningful, even if it can't be part of the academic indicator.
Great, thank you. And the second question, which was which was unrelated, but around the engineering design work.
Yeah, Vanessa, I don't know if you want to take that one. I know that there's not, for as long as the ESSA plans are, sometimes there's not always great detail in terms of what specific programs are, but I'll defer to Vanessa on that.
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity is probably around Title IV Part A. These grants allow for a lot of STEM programs, and that could include after-school programs that focus on robotics or things like that. In terms of extra engineering design work. But there's also opportunities to, in Title II, there's professional development that could help teachers work through those problems. Or, of course, there's, Title I Part B of incorporating engineering design into your state assessment. And Jenny is right that a lot of these plans weren't terribly specific in the things they were proposing because funding is still very unclear. So a lot of states, some states like Louisiana, for example, even said, we're not going to make concrete plans unless we know what the funding is for these grants. So I can't say I remember a lot of really standout opportunities, but it is kind of sprinkled throughout. I hope that's helpful.
Yes.
And in terms of, I know part of your other question was advocating for science assessments, and I think it's also easy to forget that making sure the assessment is high quality and aligned and actually measuring what you want to be measuring, and that the state summative assessment is really only part of the picture, and making sure that districts and schools are creating a system of assessments that makes sense and can all work together to give teachers and students the best possible information about student learning and how to adjust instruction.
Great, thank you. There was a resource that was sent via the question box, which I've just added into the chat box for participants to take a look at, that talk a little bit more about NGSS. I don't know if there are any other questions, if anybody wants to raise their hand or type those in the question box. We're just about wrapping up on time. And there was one question I should mention of whether this as a webinar resource will be available on the reports. And the answer is yes. The webinar is being recorded and the link will be shared with everyone, as well as the links for the reports that were shared as well. And if there are no other questions, I will say a great big thank you to our panelists. and Brian Carter from the Overdeck Family Foundation for connecting us with Education First and Achieve to take a look at these reports in greater depth. I don't know, Brian, if you want to say any final words. No pressure.
Nope. Really appreciate everyone joining, and thanks for the great work of Achieve and Education First on these two reports.
Great. Thank you. And with that, I think we will go ahead and log off. Is there any final words from panelists? Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.